Greetings from San Jose, California. My name is Alba, and I just want to go ahead and share my testimony with you guys and what Christ has done in my life. So, I come from a broken home. My parents were divorced by the age of 8, and I remember the confusion and the pain that I felt at that time. And
Let's do it when they're sleeping.
so, I just want to go ahead and share with you guys what God has done in my life. I come from a broken home, a fatherless home, and I didn't grow up knowing about Christ. I didn't even have religion. I had no idea that there was a love unending that would fill every void, every broken piece of me. And my parents were divorced by the age of 8, and it left a lot of deep scars in my heart because not only were my parents no longer together, but during the time that they were, my dad was an alcoholic, and we were exposed to a lot of painful things because of it. So as I got older, some of those things started to rise up in me, and by the age of 10, I started cutting myself. I started to enjoy releasing the pain that I felt inside. And I remember the shame that it left afterwards, hiding the scars. But it it helped release some of that pain. And by the time I was 12, I started drinking and I started smoking. And it got to the point where I was running away from my past and only got into a darker place. I started feeling really depressed by the age of 13. I remember nights where I would just wonder what what was I doing in this world with all this pain and all this hurt. I started to isolate myself. I started to push myself into a darker place. I remember by the age of 16, I went through a very traumatic experience, and I attempted suicide shortly after that. And it landed me in a mental hospital for a few weeks, and it brought me to a place of questioning like never before. I questioned my existence, why I had been born, why would God let all of those things happen to me? If there's a God, why would I feel those things? Why would I feel this pain, this emptiness? And I remember just wanting it all to end. And I went to a church with my stepsister when I was 17, and it was my first encounter with the Word of God and Jesus Christ coming to die for me. And, many of us have been there where we use God as a 911 call. And I was being faced with going to juvenile hall or going to church. And so I went to church that day, and there was an altar call afterwards. And I remember answering that altar call, and there was this life that I felt that day. And I was 17. I went right back out those doors and back into the life that I was living, and got myself into some more pain and into some more depression. By the time that I was 19, I got pregnant, and I was forced to think about someone else besides myself. And I would love to say that it changed me. It briefly did, and it took the focus off of my emotions. But 2 years after I had given birth, I went right back into that lifestyle. I started drinking again. I started smoking, doing drugs, and it got to the point where I just felt even emptier than before, because now I wasn't only hurting myself. I had a little boy who was looking up to me. And so I decided, you know what? I'm going to do this. I'm going to get into a program and I'm going to get my life together. But God had other plans for me. I went into this program for single mothers, and shortly after I got kicked out, I started smoking and drinking in the program, and I got kicked out, and I was forced to look for a new place to live. I didn't have the help of my mom. I didn't have any family that was willing to help me. So I rented a room, and in that complex, I met my then boyfriend, now husband, and it was a whirlwind type of thing. And I got pregnant about 3 months after meeting him. And we weren't ready for it. Mentally, I wanted to have a family. Mentally, I wanted to settle down. But emotionally, I was not ready for what was going on. He came from a very different background than I did, but very similar. And he wasn't ready to let go of what he was going through at the time. And I just didn't have the fight in me. So I was about 3 months pregnant when I took off. I went MIA. I cut all ties. And during that time, I remember questioning again. I remember the sleepless nights. I remember those conversations with God. What is my life matter to you? Why am I going through all of this? And I ended up homeless with my two oldest children. And I remember just being broken. I literally had no money. I'm checking out of this hotel room and I get a phone call. And it was my husband's mom. And she asked me, "Hey, how are you doing?" And at that moment, my pride went out the window. Everything just fell apart within me, and I broke down and I started crying. And I told her, I'm on the streets. I have nowhere to go. I have no money. And so she offered her house to me. She said, "Hey, if you want, I have a room. You could come stay with me." And automatically I was like, there's no way I'm going to go back to where my crazy baby's daddy is. And she tells me, "Hey, he's locked up. And if you don't want to stay here when he comes back, then you don't have to. Just get off of the streets and get those kids off the streets." And I said, okay. So I didn't know it then, but God had other plans for my life. And I remember starting to ask for forgiveness and making amends with my husband. Back then we were still not together. But when he came out of jail, I remember telling myself and God that if this was meant to be and if this was from God, I was going to go ahead and keep fighting, and I was going to give it my all. And to tell you that it was not easy is an understatement. We faced many, many battles. I feel that because we did both know the hand of God by then, that we had already experienced God's forgiveness but walked away, I think that it made it harder to face the things that we were going through. We had to fight against family. We had to fight our past. We had to fight so many things. Yet God had something much bigger than both of us, because we had been together for about 6 months, and we were both in a place where we were just tired of trying to do this on our own. And I remember just trying to hold on, because I did remember that glimpse of hope I did remember what it felt like when I had answered that altar call years ago. And one day we had a knock on our door, and they were from the Potter's house. They said, "Hey, we're having an outreach concert. Would you guys like to come and check it out?" And so I'm sitting there trying to convince Alex to go with me. And he's like, "No, I don't want to go." And I'm like, "Come on, let's just do it for the kids. Let's just go." And so he reluctantly went with me. And as we're walking up to the outreach concert, I remember they're rapping. They're doing things that we were familiar with, that were from our culture, but with different messages. And I think that that's what attracted me so much to Jesus Christ this time around, that he was presented to me in a way that I understood, that I felt familiar with. And I remember that day sitting on those chairs. They did a skit of a couple, and the husband came home and he's drunk, and they're fighting, and it was a reflection of what Alex and I had been living for the past 6-7 months. And during the skit, they're fighting, and he's yelling at her, and he has a gun in her hand, and it goes off. And when it went off, something in my heart went off as well. It was like God showing me, this is what you are going to end up like if you don't change. And that night, I answered the altar call, and I laid it all down that day. I remember feeling this weight lifted off of me. I remember this renewed hope. There was all of a sudden, I wanted to know what the future held.